So science prides itself on empiricism, right? And for me to say something like the bacterium is sentient because it swims up the sucrose gradient it seems to be an assertion that I offer no evidence in support of other than this mechanism which can be understood in terms of pure cause and effect. Um, and while empiricism is certainly a useful uh, tool and a great way to understand certain aspects of nature, if we only admit those things which we can see as knowledge, we leave out about half of reality, because it's quite simple, and maybe you'll think it's so obvious that you know we don't even need to concern ourselves with it, but I think we have completely ignored the significance of this simple fact, which is that um, while it is important to pay attention to what is seen, to what is looked at, we also have to consider the eye which looks, the seer that allows us to see all of these details. Um, and of course, we can. It seems only do this in our own case. We can only introspect within ourselves. We can only know our own inside. We cannot know the inside. We cannot know the seer of any other object that we see, or at least that's the assumption. Um, so when we look at a bacterium, we see only the cell membrane, but within that various chemical mechanisms and nothing else. Similarly, if I were to look into any of your brains, if you were to look into my brain, you would see various electric and chemical mechanisms. But we all know, at least I know about myself and you about yourself, that you are conscious. There's something it's like to be you. You have experience. You feel pain. You feel pleasure. You get excited. You're happy. You're sad. You visualize. You have dreams. You have intentions and wants and desires, and you, at least as far as you're concerned, act freely. You make choices and decisions. But the problem is that scientifically, there's no way to prove that that's true. There's no way for you to show somebody else your thought process. I mean, you can show somebody else your neural patterns if you're hooked up to an fMRI machine or something, but those don't necessarily translate to the thought you are having. There's a project in neuroscience called the neural correlates of consciousness, and the assumption is that we would expect to find a one-to-one relationship between a particular thought and a particular state of the brain, which can be measured. But that doesn't seem quite right to me. I mean, I do think whatever consciousness is, that it's deeply and intimately tied to and related to the brain, but not in such a simple way as that. I don't think of our experience as caused by the brain. I wouldn't say that consciousness contradicts what causality actually is either. I would just say that we're dealing with different aspects of the same process, and that while consciousness takes place in relation to a physical world which is mechanically connected in various important ways that you might think were determined, but even in physics nowadays, we no longer live in a Newtonian universe where we can predict or assume we can predict everything with precise certainty. We recognize that in trying to measure reality, we change reality so that any knowledge or observation we make is necessarily from a particular perspective. Uh, this is what relativity and quantum physics pretty much tell us on a basic level, that we can't have a God's eye view of the world in which we live. So the assumption that it is all a determined mechanism is just that. It's an assumption. Science hasn't proven that. In fact, it's proven quite the opposite, that determinism is not a feature of the physical world. Non-equilibrium thermodynamics have established that the future cannot be predicted. I mean, even thermodynamics of closed systems that was developed, in the late 19th century, they already knew that matter could not be determined with certainty. They could only determine it statistically. They could tell you what it will probably do. At least they could tell you what, inert gases in a container would do. Non-equilibrium, open thermodynamic systems are entirely different, and we have no way of even coming close to predicting what they're going to do. And living organisms are just that, or far from equilibrium, open thermodynamic systems. So even from within physics, determinism is no longer a theory, or it's not even a theory. Determinism is more of a metaphysics or an ontology. So it's already outside of science. It's not something science really concerns itself with. Science is after more so practical knowledge than anything else. We've kind of given up on metaphysics or ontology in the modern age, because it seems like something beyond our pale as human beings, or at least that's what, that has been the trend in philosophy for the last few hundred years, since Kant, I guess. And, the idea that the world itself is always out of our reach because we only know the world within certain structural projections of our own mind, and we cannot know the world otherwise. So science, therefore, kind of restricts itself to telling us about the world that we can know, not really concerning itself about the world independent of that, which a lot of people don't fully appreciate about what science has told us. That since Kant, science has been more about technology, about means of solving specific problems, accomplishing specific goals, rather than about actually giving us the truth about reality. That remains to be given to us by philosophy, which is in disrepute for the most part these days. People really only respect science. Philosophy is kind of, you're sticking your head in the clouds and you're not really accomplishing anything because there's no proof to be offered. At the end of the day, there are only arguments, endless arguments. But I guess what I was trying to get across in this second video was that I can't prove to you that a bacterium is sentient. But if you acknowledge that you yourself are sentient, you are admitting something about yourself that you can't prove to me either. I have to believe it. I have to assume it in order for your consciousness, your sentience to be a reality for me. So if you look at it that way, it doesn't seem like too much of a leap to assume bacteria